When people were asking, oh, there's no way the government, the FBI, could have gone through 300,000 emails in such a short time period. And everybody in lit support, everyone in Discovery goes, yeah, we can. We call that Tuesday, But I think it is such a great example as to not just that the deadlines and the timelines are accelerating, but that if you handle it correctly, it's not a big deal. I wanted to share a story today without naming clients and without naming, any individuals. But we recently had a case where plaintiffs filed a motion and it was granted 3 weeks for discovery, a 3-week window. And we're talking, when all was said and done, the size of the data that was being discovered was in the terabyte range, 3 weeks. The first week, the attorneys tried to find a vendor, and Adam, I'm sure you'll be able to speak to this in a little while. The first week, the attorneys were trying to find a vendor that could handle it and was willing to take on the collection, processing, and hosting. We have the ability to host internally, many firms do, but we decided with this sort of timeline, you know what? You have it already in your possession, process it, host it, why waste a day, 2 days, half a week, whatever it is. But we had already lost a week. It was now a Friday. We had 4 distinct custodians that we needed to collect data from at 4 distinct locations throughout the country. Clock's ticking, and we're going. Partners stressing out, wonderful curse words coming out. Fortunately, it's a new era. No one was throwing anything at my head. I do have a scar back here from a stapler from many years ago. That, at least, I think we've passed. But that stress and the cursing and the go, now, cut whatever corners you have to. And I'm thinking to myself, why am I the only one worried about the risk involved and compliance, not the partner, who is under a very different set of guidelines and stress and everything? So I'm like, it's not a problem. We got this. First vendor accepted the job and then got fired immediately because of the parties involved and the deadline and everything else. Wanted a $50,000 retainer in cash within 5 business days. Our client and our partner said, and because this may be broadcast, I won't say it, but the 3 starting letters are GFY. And I think the partner was right to do so because we found the right people who had individuals geographically dispersed, could go to the locations, collected the data. But what was interesting, and again, because of the timeline, because of the expedited need, the partner was like, you need to put into the correspondence, you need to say, we need absolutely everything Monday, up and reviewable. I looked at her and I said, no. Do you really? If I can get you 50,000, 500,000, 100,000 records Monday, do you really care about a remaining 20,000? And she looked at me and she goes, no, I don't care. That's fine. But it was very interesting. You talk about, as Joe mentioned, that sort of traditional way of doing things. And especially for a lot of lawyers, if I yell loud enough, I can browbeat and cow you into doing whatever I want. Because gosh darn it, I'm a partner in a major AM law firm. At this point in my career, I'm like, I don't really care. Because also, in some ways, and those of us in the room that do this, we kind of hold a lot of the cards. Not all of them, and no, we wouldn't hold the data hostage, overtly. But we know what goes into the process. And we actually know how long it takes. What takes longer when you're dealing with these deadlines is doing it wrong from the outset. If you do it right, and this is a challenge, and I will always say this is a challenge, regardless of the amendments, regardless of the firm or the attorneys you work for, sole practitioner, largest firm in the world, whatever it is, they cannot seem to always understand that pre-planning, that strategy session day 1 is worth the time because you will save time that you don't have later on. Time to restart the process, time to find a new vendor, time to do it all over again. And make your service providers your ally, your partner, because you're going to need them. And they speak the same language as you do and understand your pain point. We all operate, and this is my segue to handing it off to Adam, we all operate under relationships. Adam and I, we're both members, we're both certified, we go back, and there may be matters that Planet Data might not be right for it. And you know what? I can trust Adam to tell me that. But when that right matter comes up, I'm calling Adam on the phone, and I know what I'm going to get from past relationships and from experience, and because we can talk about it and know that there is that common understanding, that we bridge that gap. You know, the federal rules are what they are. You just have to deal with them. And they're not big, scary things if you deal with them. We have, you know, it's like the opening to the $6 Million Man. We have the technology, you know, and that's really where I think we were off on a wrong foot. Everyone talking about TAR. I'm sure, Joe, you wrote a lot of articles about it, or your colleagues did. And, you know, TAR became synonymous with predictive coding. And predictive coding has its place. But I would say now is really where I think we are going to be relying on technology to help us with these deadlines. You have 400,000 records in your database, 500,000, whatever it is. Can you statistically say, I've looked at 100,000, and I can, and here's my argument why that is sufficient. And that's going to become more and more prevalent. They talked about it in the early days of predictive coding, but didn't go anywhere. I think now you're going to find that reliance on statistics, that reliance on technology is going to really get us over that hump. And I think we're going to start to see a change brought about because of the rules, not because of the technology. I think we put a little bit of the cart before the horse, but I'm curious, and here's the segue, I'm curious to hear, you know, what Adam's take on it is from that service provider side, who probably sees so many more technology projects than even I do. Adam?
Thank you, Brad. Thank you for the tea. Piggyback off a couple things Brad just kind of mentioned that we definitely are seeing more and more nowadays. First of all, something I say a lot that you just kind of touched on. I kind of use this line a lot at the beginning of cases when a client reaches out with what is increasingly becoming some rush deadlines. Sometimes you have to take a minute and slow down at the beginning of a project, and that's ultimately going to save you a lot of time and a lot of headaches downstream. A lot of clients will call me, listen, we got this 3-week deadline, we have, you know, all these custodians all over the place, maybe all in the US, maybe different countries, we know we're going to be dealing with a ton of data, we need someone on the ground tomorrow, we need to get this stuff, we need to get it in, we need to be up and running on Monday. And that all sounds good and well, and I understand the urgency, and I understand that there's certain levels of stress and things that are out of your control. At the end of the day, we need to understand the entire scope. We need to really take a step back. Who are the players involved? What's at stake? What kind of case are we talking about? Does it make sense to over-collect? Does it make sense to do a targeted collection? There are a lot of these things that can have significant impacts downstream that you really sometimes got to pump the brakes at the beginning and say, you know what, let's get all the key players on a conference call. Let's maybe put this off one day, let's get all the right people on the call tomorrow, maybe you can't do it today, and let's really get a complete understanding of the picture. Who are the players, where's the data, what are we trying to accomplish, and let's try to reverse engineer this to get you ultimately where you're trying to be. So I think that that's a great point right from the beginning. You can't just say, okay, I got saddled with this, we're just gonna dive in right now, and by Monday we're gonna be up and running. Sometimes you have to take a step back and really understand what the big picture is, and it's ultimately gonna save you a ton of headaches downstream. In a related kind of a sense, I would say, because I have been in the past, I'd say 6 months to a year, I have noticed more attorneys and more case teams reaching out to me with more expedited timeframes and more expedited discovery deadlines that have been imposed by them by the courts. This could be my experience. I tend to think that this is probably more prevalent than even what I see. The partners that tend to take a little bit more of a reasonable approach with the opposing side, have a reasonable discussion, come to an agreement, come to an understanding, not make everything contentious just for the point of arguing. It seems to run a lot smoother downstream. Don't make big issues arguing and wasting time over things that are going to have little to no impact downstream. We know what we're going to need, we know what they're going to need. Let's go about it in a reasonable and efficient manner, and let's save time. There's going to be plenty of time for the attorneys to argue over the facts and the merits of the case, right? At the end of the day, Brad, I know you'll agree with this. Everyone who in this room who's been in the trenches on some of this e-discovery work, every case is different. No two cases are the same. Everything, you know, there's always going to be some challenges that you're going to run into and things that you're going to see that are unique, whether it's file types or whatever. It's not that hard. People make this a lot harder than it has to be. the TAR talk, the predictive coding talk, the machine learning talk. I think, Brad would certainly agree with it. Less than 10% of the cases in the entire world are using some of these really advanced technologies. Don't overthink it. There obviously, yes, there are good fits, and there are certain cases you have a second request and you got 10 terabytes and you got 30 days to respond to the SEC or DOJ. Unless you bring on 500 contract attorneys, you're not putting eyes on all 10 million of those documents. And at the end of the day, you're going to have to turn over the bulk of everything to that regulatory agency anyway. Let's take measured, reasonable, defensible steps. Let's come up with a workflow that we can speak to, that we put some thought into, and let's come up with a way that we can go about this in a measured and efficient way. Brad pointed out another thing that I've seen a lot more of in the past year, which I've been preaching for years and I'm finally starting to see adopted more: random sampling. Something that's so simple, and I think this ties into another trend that I've noticed that I think ties in with expedited timelines. I've been saying there's been a reemergence of kind of early case assessment in the past year or two. Before, TAR and predictive coding was the talk of our e-discovery world for the past 4 or 5 years. Before that, it was really kind of at the infancy of e-discovery. Early case assessment was one of the big buzzes that went on for a couple years. Getting into the data earlier, understanding the data earlier. And I think I've seen a big reemergence of that because of the expedited timelines combined with the exploding volumes of data. You might have, if you're in a second request, you probably have 30 days. If you're in a commercial litigation, maybe you have, 60, 90 days, between your 26F, your scheduling order, and when you're first going in to make some arguments, you might have 2-3 months. If you're dealing with, a terabyte of data, you don't have a lot of time to lose up front, so you need to ramp up quickly. You need to get a handle of what is in this data set that my client has. Where is the really potentially responsive materials that I need my team to focus their time and energies on so that I can really focus on the merits of the case? And how can I quickly and efficiently early on carve out and get rid of a lot of the junk? And that's where I've seen a lot of our teams, both on the law firm and the corporate side, really start to make some inroads and to make some headway. How can we efficiently take this 1 million documents that the client has just given us and, within the first day or two, let's make some very strategic, defensible, repeatable decisions that we can make strong arguments as to why we made these decisions that's going to get rid of 20, 30, 50% of that data right out of the gate. Let's explain why we're making these decisions. Let's document them. This is another thing that comes up a lot. Some of these cases, we have a case that's been dragging on for 8.5 years. You know how many attorneys have been on and off that case in 8 years? You're trying to find out, how did we run this search 5 years ago? What is this batch of documents? Where did this come from? Who decided we had to produce that document? Another thing that's very, very important now, especially with the exploding volumes, you have to document everything. You don't have to, read it, but for example, every time we run a search in my company, every time we run a search in our platform, we automatically send a search analysis type of report to the client in a PDF format or Excel format, whatever they want. Save it in the case file. You don't need to read the whole thing. You don't need to understand the whole thing even. But 3 years from now, if that case is still going on, you're not going to remember how or why you made that judgment call on the coding or the culling or the searching. Quite frankly, half the attorneys on that case team might not even be at that firm anymore. You want to always have everything documented so you can go back to it if the judge questions you, if there's a new associate on the team, so that they can kind of follow that breadcrumb trail back and understand how we got to where we are today. And again, the other big thing I really wanted to stress was kind of that reemergence, I feel like, of early case assessment. We deal with a lot of second requests, securities, pharma, cases where you're dealing with hundreds of gigs of data, if not terabytes of data. And again, unless you're pulling in, hundreds of contract attorneys, we're getting to a point where it's just not feasible to look at every single document. Not all technologies are right for every single case, but there is certainly a transformation taking place. I think it's somewhat generational. I think it's somewhat being driven by the rules and just the exploding volumes, but you need to have a bare bones minimum understanding of some of the newer technologies. Quite frankly, some of them aren't. They're new. Some of them we've been using in the industry for 20 years. They've just been rebranded and renamed, and people think that, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. A a lot of this stuff is not all that different from when we were doing scanning and coding, 15 years ago. Now, there's been obviously leaps and bounds, in some technologies, but again, people tend to complicate this a lot more than it has to be. You have to identify the data to collect quickly and early and do it in a defensible manner. You have to come up with a strategic workflow to search and cull that data in an effective and cost-effective and efficient manner quickly. And you have to have a good review platform. At the end of the day, I'm on the vendor side. I go into every meeting and I say, tell me your top 2 or 3 struggles on all the vendors and all the cases that you've had in the past couple of years. What are the top 2 or 3 things that have stuck out in your head that said we need to find a better way to do this? And give me 2 or 3 things that you haven't struggled with, but that you've thought to yourself, there's got to be a better way. At the end of the day, my goal is always, this is what I tell clients when I'm meeting with them for the first time. You've probably worked with 4, 5, 6, 10 different e-discovery vendors, right? There's 100 of me out here in Manhattan. And everyone that meets with you probably tells you they got the greatest PMs in the world and the greatest technology since sliced bread, and they're going to make all your troubles go away. And that all sounds great. At the end of the day, until you work with them, you'll probably never really know. We're here to make life easy on you. We're here to do things right the first time. If you have a vendor that can't get a load file right, if you have a vendor that's not giving you access to your data so that you can get in there and understand what's in there and do some searching and culling, if everything's being done in a black box and you have no clue how that algorithm is working, it's not that helpful in my opinion. You need to work with a company where I always say I want our team to be an extension of your team. And especially with small and mid-sized firms, we've seen a huge uptick in this, and I think this also plays into the rules somewhat. I increasingly am doing a lot of work with, I'd say, small but more so mid-sized firms, mid-sized boutique litigation firms. A lot of these guys have come out of the big AmLaw 100s and started up their own boutique shops. These guys are getting, Fortune 500, but the giant, top 50 corporate clients in the world. They're getting the same cases that Skadden and Dwayne Morris and all the big firms are getting. They're getting them because they have the relationship with the corporate partners, but they're not charging what Skadden's charging them. The technology has leveled the playing field. The volumes are not going to change. They're only going to keep going up. A mid-sized firm that's, representing Citibank or Ford or a giant company, they might not have the department that Brad has at WilmerHale. They need to do more with less, and that's a phrase that everyone's been hearing a lot more of lately. We need to do more with less. Find a vendor that enables you to do that. Find a vendor where you can leverage their technology, their PMs. It's got to be a marriage of both, and that's one thing that I'll leave you on. You can't have technology without the people. You can't have the people without technology. Everyone's going to tell you they have both, but you need to determine for yourself who does and who doesn't. It has to be a marriage of technology and people. You could have the greatest technology in the world. Your project manager doesn't answer the phone when you have a production due, at 5 o'clock. What good is that technology doing you? So I'll leave you on that note. I think, the marriage of the people and the technology enabling you to have an earlier understanding of the data, but also realizing that when you're saddled with an expedited timeline and a large volume of data, don't be so quick to just hit the ground running. Take a step back, get the right people on that call or in that meeting, and really get a complete understanding of what is the issue, who are the players, and let's bounce some ideas around in terms of what is the most effective way of approaching this that's going to be beneficial for us to accomplish what we need to as the law firm and argue the merits of the case. Also, make sure that we're doing it in a cost-effective manner for the client. And I think balancing those two is really the key.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
I'm going to pass it to Joe.
Well, thanks to the experts. Really had 3 different great viewpoints. Why don't we open up for some discussion, comments, questions, arguments, anything that you guys might be seeing on a daily basis, from your side. I'll start with the question. I'll throw it out to you.
I actually had a question for you. Where do you see, where and how do you see the sanctions playing into driving the change? I think it's going to be, this goes to the generational thing. I think it is going to be generational because I think a lot of judges are gun shy because a lot of the older ones are coming from the same old tradition. They know the rules have changed, but they don't want to pull the trigger. They don't get what a terabyte is, and they can be
sold a dog and pony show of how hard it is, whatever. So they don't want to go that route. I think that the younger judges, as they start cycling in, who understand what a computer looks like, they're going to be more willing to do that. But the thing I wanted to echo of what you said that I think is absolutely true is more and more work is going to these medium and boutique firms, and it's happening because we did a thing a while back. General counsel, when you poll them, are increasingly confident in the abilities of these firms to do a lot of the work that's out there for them. Not everything, but more and more they're trusting those firms, and so that's going to be a trend.
And increasingly, I've seen the GCs that I know and I work with are increasingly including in their directives to the outside counsel that they hire. We will literally not even allow first, second, third year associates on our. We are not paying for that. We're paying you a certain level, and we expect a certain level of service for that. We're not even. You can't have anyone less than a third year on our matter.
And from inside the law firms, I think we're seeing very much the same thing. There's often situations where, who's doing the work at the different price points now, especially for big law, for the AM law firms, it's definitely a struggle, and it's a change. And it is because the rise of technology has leveled the playing field where these smaller and more mid-sized firms are able to compete with the Scaddens, with all the big guys, because quite frankly, that heavy lifting, and I did work at Skadden for about 6 years, many lifetimes ago, and there was a tendency back then that we'll just throw more people at it. Every problem can be solved by just throwing more people at it. And we've certainly gotten away from that. I mean, just the volumes that we have now and these now more expedited schedules and deadlines, doesn't matter how many people you have. You can have every contract reviewer in the tri-state area, and it's not going to make a difference. You're not going to be able to, do a linear review. So it's something definitely to watch, and I think as an industry, a lot of the writing that had been done about it, whether it was ECA, whether it was predictive coding, whether it was TAR, I think we got ahead of ourselves. We was like, oh my gosh, technology, it'll solve everything. And it didn't. And it sounded good. Right. And, there were many articles published about it, but it didn't get us over the hump because nothing had changed. And I think, as we've been talking about tonight, I think that you're going to start seeing that shift now. I would also, depending on what practice areas you're working in or what you're supporting, what's also been an interesting change is the overall size of data is definitely just continuing to grow, and it's voluminous. But as the law firm, as the outside counsel, we're not necessarily seeing those terabyte-sized deliveries anymore because the clients are pre-culling, or they're bringing in the vendors beforehand, or they have their own workflow and methodology because they understand it. They're, maybe not always the general counsel's office, but certainly the IT departments get it, and they're at least a half step ahead of the rest of us. So we're getting it, and suddenly what we expected would be, oh my gosh, all hands on deck, all support on deck. You're like, no, we'll be done in a week. It's okay. We got this. And it's really it's a very interesting time because things are changing and shifting rapidly. Adam, you mentioned a couple of things that resonated with me, at least. I'm curious to hear what other people think about it. Is the technology? Yeah, I'm a huge fan of technology, and yet at the same time, I am not a fan of any one technology. Stand me up with the right team who understands it, and I can make that old concordance database get up and sing. Because quite frankly, you know what? I don't care all the bells and whistles. It's a relational database. And either you know how to do it. Give me an oldster like me who knows Boolean search terminology. I can write that great, search string, and you're going to get through it. You can do it. It will suck, but you can do it. So I'm interested to hear people's views on that. And the other thing I'm interested to hear is, you were talking about the resurgence of random sampling. But I would argue that slightly and say, I think it's more, if such a thing can exist, targeted random sampling. As we've become more sophisticated, more knowledgeable, it's sort of, okay, let's try it this way, and if this doesn't work, we're going to try it another way. And at least we can report on it. And again, those reports that you were talking about are, guys, it's paramount. track this stuff, take snapshots, lock it down, save it to your document management system, because I have a case that 3 years ago they told me it was winding down. 3 years later, that shit's still going on. It will not end. I don't believe anybody anymore. So, yeah, thank you. So again, I'm curious, guys, what are you seeing? What is it about the technology, and what is it about the usage of that technology? Is it a help? Is it a hindrance, or doesn't it matter?
I'll start. The use of technology, it's not being used. Like you said, predictive coding, TAR, early case assessment. No, everybody wants to touch the document. Everybody still wants to do a linear review, no matter. And like you said, once you have a great team, it don't matter what platform you have. We can have iConnect. We can have, any type of platform. As long as the team knows what they're looking for and what they're looking to do, they can do it without a platform. And here at Bernstein, sometimes they do it without a platform.
We still have the crazy people who want to print.
Yeah, I mean, we also have an increased amount of our clients getting involved and doing that pre-culling and sending us the data ahead of time. So there's not this huge big data dump that we're getting anymore, because the clients are so involved and they're doing, they're culling their own data, they're doing date restriction. They're very savvy and with their own technology and their own data. So we're not getting swamped anymore. But we know, but we still need to be sophisticated enough to handle the data that we have.
Absolutely. Just out of curiosity, do we have anyone from the client side here tonight?
I would say I am.
Yeah.
I work for Siemens. I'm fairly new to e-discovery, so I'm learning a lot. But I work with Siemens, and we have a e-discovery team, and then I'm part of the compliance team, so legal compliance. So we, like my team, we support the lawyers that deal with like whistleblowing or antitrust cases, and if they turn into like litigation cases, then that's where I guess this part will come in. But I would say I'm from the client side.
Okay.
And yes, we do, like when we deal with outside law firm, a lot of times it's because, I think it's more because of the cost. So if we send you guys, X number of gigs of data, then it costs this much. So we try to like limit it, apply key dates, filters, and everything before we send it to you guys, so that it's for cost reduction really for us.
Well, everything goes down in money.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You put a price tag to it, okay, we'll follow. Yeah.
I've got a question from a recruiting standpoint, and this is for you, Andrea. What does the workflow, like your team's workflow, what does it look like today versus 3 years ago? And if you guys are under tighter deadlines, is your team working longer, or do you say, hey, let's grab a contractor for 6 months or 3 months, so you guys you're going to see your family on Sunday?
I think we're unique in that sense because we have staff attorneys on board, so we're never having a crunch issue. It's like the attorneys will call the staff attorney room and say, hey, who's not busy? And then you'll see them all file into the associate's office, and they'll get their marching orders, and they'll work over the weekend, but they're still going home, and they're so they'll come in, they'll work a couple of hours, they'll come in on Saturday. No one is in the weeds anymore. No one is stressed out. I mean, unless we're like going to deposition or anything, but we definitely have a quality of life here. So we're not crazy like we used to. So, in New York. In our New York office. Our San Diego office, that's another story.
They're not listening right now, are they? They're not listening right now, are they?
No.
You talked about linear review before, and everybody has lots of technology options, but do you think that's really what your team prefers, or what your client prefers, or?
I think, Jessica, you want to answer that?
The client just wants
Are
to
you
know
okay with me recording?
Oh, it's fine. Yeah.
in terms of what the attorneys prefer, and actually I was curious to what people thought about generationally also. And I've noticed that a lot of the attorneys that I work with now are fairly younger, and so they listen more to a certain extent to what we have to say, and I found a proactivity in there that I didn't, we wouldn't necessarily have gotten with your pre-Sedona, lawyer. But in terms of the linear review, linear is just sort of like going back to the plagiarism is your friend, this is the way we do it, this is the way we've always done it. Some of it's traditional, but then some of it, some of it's linear is sort of like their starting point, and they sort of branch out and they come back. We don't have a lot of the whole batches or pools or whatnot, but a lot of it is, linear in terms of the search terms and the search results, and it's just sort of as a culling to a culling to a culling sort of thing. But like we said before, we still have the crazy people who, want us to print it out once we send the email saying it's in the database, and they're like, great, can you send me all the PDFs?
Yes.
It's like, database. That was the point of the email about the database.
Love the paper.
Yeah.
But, I would echo that as well, and Phil works with me as well. He's another WilmerHale, and I think there is a place still actually for linear review, but only when you've just funneled it all down, and maybe that's at the partner or counsel level now, where the staff attorneys, we have staff attorneys as well, and they'll do a lot of the heavy lifting, and they work very closely with us. So look, there's a place for it. It tells a story. When you get down to a certain chronology to it, it tells a story. You're going to want to do that for deposition prep, witness prep, whatever the case may be. Phil has heard me drone on often enough. I would argue, it's very interesting. We're talking about electronic discovery. We're talking about technology. We're talking about how all of this comes into play. And I would put to everyone here that, again, because I'm going to spin it up in a concordance database and make it sing for you all, not in my voice, don't worry. But it all comes down to communication. Whether it's communication with the client, with Siemens, whether it's communication with the staff attorney. What is it that we're looking for? Have that conversation with your vendor. What is going to get us to that finish line? And quite frankly, what is that actual finish line? Is it really go through 10 million records and say, statistically speaking, we've looked at everything, or linear speaking, we've looked at everything? What is it? Is it just to stay out of above the law? Because some of us, we do. I think we all know some attorneys who that is their end goal.
Smart move.
But I would challenge everybody here that as much as we talk about these technological solutions and how we have to leverage it, it all comes back to the basics. Whether it is the plagiarism, there's a story to be told there, but who's telling it? And how are we going to get to the kernel? What is discovery? You're trying to find what wins your case or what tells your story. And if you don't know what that is, if you are not communicating with your partner, with your client, with your vendor, you're going to fail. You're not going to get there. You're not going to tell that right story. Ask the questions. Like that partner in the anecdote I provided who said, I want everything Monday. I don't care what it takes. Like, do you really? No, of course I don't really want it all on Monday.
It just sounded good.
It sounded great, and it sounded scary because there were curses in it. There were, it sounded really good. And I would, again, challenge you all that exists with your regulators, that exists with your opposing counsel. You have to produce everything by Monday. Really? And it comes to, well, you're going to miss the Friday FedEx. Don't forget, there's a Saturday FedEx. You have time there, but if you don't communicate, I don't care what technology you're using.
And I run into that constantly. I need all of this ready to start review tomorrow morning. Okay.
You told me you have 5 associates on this? Okay. Don't think your 5 associates are looking at all 1.2 million records. If I have 100,000 ready for you tomorrow morning, that's fine. Okay. Set the expectation on the front end. Ask the question. Again, understand the big picture. A lot of times, there's a lot of stress going on behind the scenes on these things. There's a lot of, powerful partners and a lot of key players that are involved in these things. Or, there's a lot of fast moving and high stakes things going on. But at the end of the day, I'll have you up and running tomorrow morning and get you going. Is that okay? And then we'll just keep rolling stuff to you. Perfect. Good.
I think now you have a lot of associates and younger associates who have all these buzzwords about electronic discovery, and they think they know what they're talking about. So they throw out, I need to review all this stuff and talk about tar and just kind of throw these words out that they're saying a lot, and they have no clue what they're talking about.
That's the flip side of the younger attorney.
And that scares me about what you were saying, which is true. A lot of these folks are saying, well, we're not going to pay for these first, second, and third years, meaning there's a transfer in firms to these staff attorney sorts of models. What scares me longer term is first year associates are morons. I say that with love, because we all were when I was first year. But you learned things about how to build a deposition by going through 100,000 documents that were probably useless. You learned, oh, this is what a hot doc is. This is why this matters, by reading the wrong things. And one of the problems of this model of let's not have these first, second, and thirds, it's like, well, then where are they learning?
Where are they going to get to in 5 years?
What's going to happen 10 years from now when all anybody knows is a magic box gave me just what it thinks the important documents are? That's a long-term concern that I've kind of been talking
And I've actually seen that. It didn't occur to me until just now what it was that I was witnessing, but I have actually witnessed that.
And I've also been in a situation where the other side wanted to do a random sampling, and our associates weren't going for it because they was like, how can we rely that it's reliable? Where's this coming from? Like, yeah. And they just didn't feel comfortable with a random sampling.
That's why they aren't in med school. They don't know math. That's why they went to law school. Come on.
And they were really questioning, how do we know that you're going to take these steps that you're indicating in this ESI protocol to indicate that this is a true random sampling? I'm like, you just have to trust them. It's a random sample. We just don't know.
Attorneys don't do faith either.
It leads to the rise of a new distinction, a new type of lawyer. The e-discovery practitioner, the e-discovery lawyer, whatever your firm might want to call it. Those that understand the algorithms, that understand, metrics and statistical sampling, but then can take it to that next step and give you, as the counsel or the partner or the senior associate, give you your talking points. Here's what we found in the data, and making it palatable, making it something that sounds very legalese. And I think you'll see more and more of that. I don't think it'll come right now from the ranks of the younger attorneys. I think it will come from the mid-level attorneys who know and see that there's a better way of doing it and want to be part of that change, or who are frustrated by banging their heads against the wall. We talk about the generational differences, and something I've noticed, younger attorneys, paralegals, everyone of that generation, they're much more comfortable using technology, but they understand technology less. Those of us of a generation who remember changing from DOS to Windows, what does your right mouse button do? In any platform, in any system, it will give you a menu. What are the properties? What's, just the basics of it. And it's also, pre-cable, post-cable, pre-MTV, post-MTV. Pre-MTV. Pre-internet, post-internet. And now everything is a touch screen, but nobody understands how these damn things work. And they expect it to be as easy as their phone. It should just be that easy, and I could just touch it and be immediate. So it's another piece of the puzzle that, quite frankly, keeps us employed and keeps it interesting because it keeps changing. And, while it speeds up, and understanding all of it and understanding the generational differences is paramount.
Good deal.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that. So I guess we'll wrap up the educational part of this. Anyone wants to hang out, network, schmooze, have a drink, have something to eat, we have a little giveaway. If anybody doesn't have a name tag, I was thinking maybe if we just take our name tags, fold them up a few times and put them in, and we'll just kind of pick them out of there. Doesn't look like anybody brought a friend. Hi, Carol. So we'll just randomly pick a few. We have a couple Starbucks cards, a couple Metro cards, and feel free to hang out and say hello to one another.
Thank you very much.
But, thanks everyone. It's really
Thank
great
you,
to see
everyone.